scary stories.
My sister has been dating her boyfriend for 3 years. She told me that in 8th grade he stalked her, just staring at her in the halls and asking about her schedule. I met him about a week after she told me this story. He seemed nice at the time. We talked for a bit, then he asked me if I wanted to play Call of Duty. We played for about an hour and had some laughs. I didn't find anything off-putting. He seemed to be a generally nice guy. However, that was 3 years ago, and these past 3 years he has been getting weirder and more obsessive, as in he would constantly call my sister to ask what she was doing, with hundreds of texts when she didn't reply immediately. They had multiple breakups and arguments over these years. Just a few days ago, my sister's friend came to us hysterical, stating that he had threatened her, that he had threatened my sister's life too, but they are still together to this day. She also stated he probably had bugged my sister's car and phone because he knows all the texts she has sent and showed up at her house when my sister's car was parked in the driveway. He didn't even know where she lived. I am convinced that her car is being traced. He even managed to track us down when we were with my grandparents on vacation. This all changed about 2 days before our vacation to California. I'm one of those people who stay up really late at night, even though it's a school day the next morning. I usually binge watch videos on my computer while lying in my bed. It was about midnight on a Saturday when I heard a faint screech. The sound was vague and distant. I brushed it off and continued to watch my videos. Then I heard a soft sound of a garage door opening. I assumed it was my sister coming home late, like my dad predicted. He left the garage door unlocked because he expected her to come home late. I heard smooth and soft footsteps walking up the wooden stairs, and then a shallow grunt. The footsteps slowly moved throughout the upstairs while I paused my video and sat up in fear. My sister would usually not care about being so quiet and went straight to the bathroom to take off her makeup. The soft footsteps ensued. I would like to now mention that I do have a lock on my door. I convinced my dad to get me one 2 years ago because I am paranoid about someone attacking me by simply opening the unlocked door. I could hear footboards creak as the footsteps neared my door. I heard a hand graze the frame of my door and grab the knob tightly. I held my breath, and my hand started to reach towards the wooden baseball bat I had under my bed. The doorknob turned slightly, but the lock restricted it from turning all the way. The intruder on the other side jiggled it a bit and ceased. I grabbed my baseball bat and gradually made my way toward my door. I saw 2 gray shoes inches away from my door. I raised my bat defensively, ready to whack whoever picked the lock or busted down my door. The shoes slowly turned and strided away from my door. My sister's door opened, and a few moments later, I heard footsteps exiting and steadily walking down the creaking and protesting stairs. I dropped my bat to my waist and walked back to my bed. I pulled a chair to barricade my door, just in case, and breathed silently to calm down. My phone was out of battery, so I couldn't call the police, and my mom and dad were on the other side of the house. I would make a mad dash for my parents' room, or I could just scream at the top of my lungs and hope they wake up before the intruder gets to me. It may also scare him off, so I screamed. I screamed as many blood-curdling cries as I could. About a minute later, I heard heavy footsteps rushing over and unlocking my door. My dad opened the door with a look of complete concern and dread. He asked if I was okay, and I told him there was someone else in the house. He grabbed my bat and hurried downstairs. He came back up a few minutes later, checking all the closets and general hiding places. He ordered me to go back to bed and lock my door. I complied. I was wide awake for half an hour, but eventually somehow dozed off. I woke up to find my dad talking to my mom in the hallway. He told me the garage was pried open with some kind of rusty tool or crowbar. The intruder had left a note in my sister's room saying he didn't know where she was and that he missed her. I knew immediately that it was her boyfriend. What disturbed me the most was when I looked at my phone, it had a new message. I had wrote a message to a number I have never seen before late at night. The only problem was I hadn't texted anyone last night, and there was a response. It read, "Merry Christmas." There's one problem with this. I haven't sent a message to anyone with this number in my life. And my phone, it was in my room last night. My story starts 4 years ago, and is still kinda happening. Lucas was the bus driver who drove the kids from my village to school next to town every day. He always was the nice bus driver, as there was a grumpy and moody one who sometimes switched shifts with him. A lot of people thought he was cool and always polite. I was 17 when there was some heavy rain in the afternoon when I was on my way home and I arrived at the station in town. Lucas was already there. As he noticed me, he let me in the bus and we started a conversation. I felt uncomfortable first, but he was always a good talker, so the weird feeling had gone soon. At one point he asked me about my then ex-boyfriend. He saw us together and the two of them used to talk when he was still in school. He was 21 at the time, already working. I told him that we broke up and that it was for the better. Then we continued talking about school. We started to talk every now and then, and after a while he asked me for my phone number, so I could maybe text him if I'm late for the bus or I need a ride in general. I found out that he was married, had 3 kids. He claimed to be 33, but later he said over 40. I never really found out how old he actually was. The day after we exchanged numbers, he texted me that he was going to take a bath and said that there would be enough space for 2. I replied that he should ask his wife about that, and he then said, "She is out of town, so I am pretty lonely." We left it at that. One time later, like 2 weeks later, I saw him and a young girl during his break making out. I sent him a message telling him that it's not the way a married man should talk to younger girls. He replied that he had explained to me later his wife didn't want to have sex with him since the birth of his 3rd child. He has multiple young girlfriends all around my age. When I asked him why he wouldn't look for someone closer to his age, he replied, "Girl, you don't know where to find the honey. Girls your age need a proper man, someone who can give it to 'em. Boys that age are no good, but girls are so sweet." We then talked about my ex, who he said was a nice guy, but could have never made me happy. I was a rebellious, moody teen, so I actually never listened to adults. Some things he told me made me think. I couldn't get it out of my head. I started to believe the twisted things he said to me. I thought he was in the right and it would be better for his marriage if he would have little girlfriends. The next day, I had school until the evening. I had to take the last bus home, and because my sleeping schedule was terrible, I fell asleep in the bus. I woke up when the bus was already empty, Lucas standing next to my seat. It was already dark outside. so I had no idea where we were. He sat down, started talking, and kissed me at some point. I asked him to stop and that I wasn't here to become one of his girlfriends. Then why did you stay in the bus? I canceled someone else for you. You don't want me to be sad, do you? And for some stupid reason, I believed him. He was the adult. He was in the right. We had sex because he made me feel guilty. I felt terrible afterwards and wanted to stop contact, but he was the one who brought me to school every day, so it was difficult to avoid him. The entire thing went on for months. Him making me feel guilty, giving me compliments, and making me feel worthless at the same time. Showering me in presents and telling me that he invested so much money in me, and it would be rude to say no to him because of that. He wants me. I'm the best he ever had. I am not allowed to leave. The time I managed to get out of the situation is because of my cat. When I tried to sneak back into my house, she started meowing, and my parents woke up, took my phone, and found the not yet deleted messages from him. They were furious. I was angry and tried to defend him. I did not want him to get in trouble. They made me change my number and read through the phone calls I made, checking that his number wouldn't show up again. I met him again. He forced me to give him my new number, and he texted me with a different one. My father noticed the amount of texts to a new number, but believed me that it was for a school project. I asked Lucas to stop, that it's too dangerous. I met my new boyfriend for a few weeks after that, and managed to end things with Lucas, for now. I changed my number again, but he got it somehow, probably from my ex. I changed it again. A few weeks later, I saw his car in my neighborhood. He did not know where I lived exactly, but he was pretty close to my house. I managed to hide myself. Later, I got a text that he was in my village, hoping to see me. He somehow got my number again. I changed it one last time, and it suddenly stopped. I thought that would be it. Fast forward to May last year. I'm 21, have a different boyfriend who happened to live close to Lucas' house. One day, he saw me. He texted me again, telling me that the same things he did all the time. I was scared. I had no idea how he managed to get my number again. It must have been my ex, who happened to be in the same theater group, but I never actually gave him my number, so he probably asked around and then told Lucas. My boyfriend noticed my reaction, and I finally told someone the whole story. He couldn't understand how I could still defend Lucas. His manipulation was pretty good. I almost gave in and agreed to meet Lucas. The next day, I saw his car in my village a few times, received text from him, and somehow managed to tell him to leave me alone. I moved to another town and blocked him everywhere. It's been since July 2016 that I last heard of him, and I am in therapy now. So, I hope it's the end of the story, and I will never see him again. When I was 17 years old, I was intrigued by computers and everything the internet had to offer. I soon found out about Yahoo chat rooms, back when they were used primarily. I would talk to a few people on there, including a friend I made which became a friend in real life even to this day. So I didn't think anything bad would happen to me. No one ever thinks that, especially on the internet. I met this one guy named Daniel. At the time, he was 28 years old. Him and I became friends very quick, and I felt like I could tell him anything like I knew him forever. Our conversation would last forever, and I ended up telling him more than I probably should ever tell anyone. One of the conversations I had mentioned that I was trying to go to school to become a computer engineer and was trying to find a job in the field to better suit my understandings. He then told me he had his own computer company and that he was trying to find some help. As a naive woman who was trying to find work in her field, I wanted to take the offer. I talked to my family members about it, and despite their reasoning, I took the job offer. I will be the first to admit that my family were not strict at all. My mom did not like the idea, but she said that I was going to do it anyways, and that at least she knew where I was going. I probably would have been more grateful if she would have put her foot down. The job was located in New Jersey, and I lived in Texas. Fast forward to about 6 months later. This was when things went from good to worse. He was still trying to get his business off the ground, but kinda started slacking at it. To make extra income, I would help others that needed it with their networking and their computers. It was a way to get out of the house since I was not allowed to leave the house without his knowledge or consent. I just figured he was protecting me since I was still unfamiliar with the city. Once I turned 18 years old, things started to get even worse out of nowhere, when he would tell me how to eat my food and to be a proper lady. He would yell at me if I accidentally scraped my fork against my teeth and little things like that. He would hack into my laptop to keep an eye on me and see who I was talking to and what I was doing. Every time my family members would call me, I had to talk to them in front of him. Things started getting so bad that I started staying at work longer hours just so I didn't have to go home. I would never mention this to my coworkers because I didn't want them to pry into my business. It wasn't until later that they found out on their own. One of my coworkers has a huge crush on me and always worried about me when it was time to go home. He knew that I would rather work a double shift than go home, and that made him worried. I honestly wish I stayed in contact with him. He was one of the best friends a girl could ask for. I started getting into MMORPG games since they took me out of the reality I was living in at the moment. I met this guy on there, and it made me feel good to have someone to talk to finally. I never meant anything by it. It was just an escape. Daniel found out about the stuff I would say to him and said that I was cheating on him, which I never did such a thing. Until this moment, I never believed that he would go psychotic on me or even hurt me. I figured he would just yell at me and try to scare me. One day he got so fed up with all of it and grabbed my cell phone and broke it in half. He looked at me and said, "Now you have no way to tell your family what you did to me." I was literally terrified at this point. He threatened me a little more, and I started crying. I figured that was the end of it, but I was completely wrong. The next day, I packed a small bag and told him that my job would allow me to do some book work while it was slow. It was a bag of some clothes I could find in a hurry. I got to work and told my coworkers what was going on. They gave me a phone and I called my grandfather, who got me a flight to Texas as soon as he could. I was so grateful for him and everyone at work. When I got to the airport in Texas, I was greeted by my family members. I called Daniel and told him that I was in Texas and I didn't want to be with him anymore. He laughed and said, "There is no way you could have got back to Texas that fast. Come home, now." I assured him that I was not coming back to him. My mom got on the phone and told him the same. I don't know what him and my mom were talking about, but she got very angry and told him to never speak to me again and hung up. I wish I could say that that was the last time I ever spoke to Daniel, but it wasn't. My mom got a new phone to replace the one that Daniel had broken, and somehow Daniel got my number. He would call and threaten me. One time he called and my mom answered and put it on speaker. He said, "You better put her on a fucking plane back to New Jersey or I will come down there and get her myself." I almost had tears in my eyes even thousands of miles away. He still terrified me. My mom replied, I will wait for you to come and get her. There is a body bag with your name on it." After that, the calls became less and he wasn't harassing me as much anymore. It took about 2 months for him to finally stop calling me, and I was able to move on with my life. I do not talk to people the same way I used to anymore, and I watch what I say to anyone now. I am a 27-year-old female, and this happened to me when I was 24. I live in Los Angeles and have for my entire life. I was feeling lonely, so I decided to go on Craigslist to try to find someone to hang out with. Not necessarily to date, but someone to just chill with. If it led somewhere, then so be it. That was my thinking. I emailed a few guys, one of which stood out to me. He sent me some pictures, and I was fine with how he looked and he seemed nice enough. We agreed to meet and go have coffee. It took him a lot longer than he said it would to get there, and once he did arrive, I instantly regretted what I was doing. But, being overly nice, I got in his car, and instead of heading to Starbucks as we planned, he drove to a CVS. I was like, what are you doing? To which he said he had to return some stuff to CVS so that he'd have money. I was super uncomfortable already and just wanted to get out of there, but again, my shyness got the better of me, and I just waited it out. Once he returned whatever it was he was returning, he then said he had to stop by his apartment. We pulled into this underground garage, and he said he'd be right back. You don't know how badly I wish I had run right then while he was gone, but I didn't. He got back in his car, and I could tell right away that he was high on something. Having been to rehab before myself, it was blatantly obvious. I told him that I'd gotten an emergency phone call while he was upstairs and that I was sorry, but I had to be taken back. I told him he could just drop me off at the nearest train station. I lived in a city like an hour away, so I wasn't about to have him drive me all the way home. We got on the freeway. That was the fastest route to the main stop. But we ended up passing the exit. I told him a few miles ahead of time which one it was, but he did not say anything. He just ignored me. I thought maybe he just hadn't heard me. Hey, that was the exit, actually. You passed it, I said. Instead of pulling over to the right lanes, he kept pulling further and further over to the left until we were all the way in the far left-hand lane. I asked him what he was doing, trying to keep my cool. I can't honestly remember his exact words, but it went something along the lines of, "I'm not dropping you off. We're having sex. Why do you think I did this?" I looked at him with my jaw to the ground and asked him, "So, you are refusing to drop me off?" I asked him. "Yes," he said, and then he sped up his car. The first thing I thought was obviously calling the police, so I pulled my cell out. He turned towards me and hit me in the face hard, and I dropped my phone because I was so shocked. The phone had fallen somewhere below his seat somewhere. I couldn't get to it. I was panicking. As we continued to drive, I tried desperately to think of what I should do. We came up on another interstate. For some reason, seeing the freeways intersect and seeing that we were about to get on yet another freeway was hugely ominous to me, and I decided I could not let him get on the next freeway. I couldn't get out of the car, so I did the only thing I could think of. I took a breath, grabbed the steering wheel, turning it as hard as I could to the right. He was so shocked he didn't even try to grab it back from me. As we crashed into one, then another car, and crashed into the side barrier, he turned towards me and started hitting me while screaming, "You fucking bitch! You fucked up everything!" I put my legs up to block the blows from his fist, I ended up falling backwards out of the car after managing to put my hand up and open the door. I ran to one of the cars we had crashed into that had pulled over behind us. The guy in the car had his phone out, presumably calling the cops. I knocked on his window screaming that this psycho tried to kidnap me, and he rolled it up all the way. I couldn't believe it. When I looked back, Psycho was coming towards me. So I said, fuck it, clearly no one is going to help, and ran towards the fence, and was even weaker because of what had happened. So literally had to lean on the fence until it bent enough for me to fall over. Climbing up a chain link fence was not an option at that moment. Luckily, instead of him following me, he ran the other direction. He just left his car on the side of the freeway. Once I was over the fence, I realized that I was on the same horse trails that I was familiar with because I had worked at the equestrian center nearby. So I just walked through the miles of trails until I got into the nearest city, which was Burbank, and called the police from a bowling alley. I never found out what happened to that psycho. The cops never told me after I made the report, but I hope he got arrested for, trying to kidnap and rape me. So, crazy, sadistic psycho rapist, let's never, ever meet again. I lived in a small coastal town in Italy, and as every summer approached, my mom, my little sister, and I would go to the beach almost every day. My dad was always working day shifts. It was a 10-minute drive, and we recently decided to go to the next town because the water wasn't as deep. We parked our car in a made-up parking lot, basically a field covered in sand and with some old trees arranged in parallel lines. And after crossing a small bridge, we would walk to the beach. The day went as any other summer day, swimming, napping under the sun, and whatnot. We then decided to take off and get back home. While we approached the small bridge, I noticed a green car sprinting down the road with flashing lights, honking as it's getting closer and closer. I can hear the driver laughing almost hysterically, pulling his head out the window and screaming, I won, I won, I won. I'm the first. Weird, but whatever. My mom tells us to get close to her, almost knowing what was going to happen, because after a couple of seconds this guy slammed his brakes and turned to go onto the bridge, accelerating, actually passing not 3 feet away from my little sister. I, being the tough 12-year-old kid that I was, just yelled at him without giving it too much thought. Fuck you, asshole. My mom just stared at me and whispered, just shut up, and let's go. I can hear the guy slamming the door of his car and started yelling to my mother, you whore, what do you want, huh? Come to me, get closer, while grinning and spitting on the ground. I then tried to see if anyone else is close to us in the parking lot, but as luck would have it, nobody was around. So there we were, me and my 7-year-old sister, paralyzed, with this 6-foot guy approaching us. I had really no idea what to do, and I was so scared for my mom. Then suddenly she opened the trunk of our car and took the metal rod used for the beach umbrella, and I swear I've never seen that look in her eyes again. She told him with a gruff voice, try to come near and I will fucking kill you. I swear on my kids, I will kill you. At that point the guy started walking away, but not without taking his eyes off of us, and talking to himself about what a massive bitch my mom was. In the meantime, my mom started screaming for help, hoping that someone getting to the beach would come, but nobody showed up. Weeks passed by, and we stopped going to that town for fear of meeting this weirdo. So we go back to our usual sea town to enjoy the last days of summer. One afternoon, I'm in the water playing with my sister, and we see the water getting crisp as when you throw a rock in it. Well, we look up, and it's the same fucking guy, sitting by himself on the beach, throwing small rocks in the sea at what we thought was just our direction, and just staring at us. We quickly get out of the water and tell my mom, who recognized him. The guy is still throwing rocks in the water with many other kids. Suddenly, he turns his head. He didn't speak a word. He just stood and stared. My mom told us sometimes there are just some crazy dudes that are completely out of this world. While still creeped out, we went home. After those encounters, I literally felt my heart sink just about every time I saw the same car model around. One of my teachers in high school had the exact same green car, so I had a fear of a particular model and color of car. Fast forward some years, and my sister and I started going to the swimming pool. All things considered, I loved it. Swimming is my favorite sport, and every one of my coaches would take me and my sister as their favorites because we trained hard and wanted to be as good a swimmer as we could be. One day, we finished one set of exercise, and my sister comes up to me almost shivering and says, "The weird guy, he's here. What do I do?" I try to peek, and it's definitely that guy not 10 feet away from us. Damn. During the next sets of exercises, I would peek underwater to see if he was staring at us, but apparently he was minding his own business. Still, he would speak loud to himself every time he finished a set. We finished our lesson and go to the respective changing rooms, and as my sister gets out of the water, I notice this guy standing near the edge of the pool, staring at her. He had a look like he was trying to figure out where he had seen her before. But my sister bolted into the showers, and this guy just shrugged it off. I wasn't afraid, though, this time, as I had my 6'2", 240-pound instructor next to me, and I knew that if this guy tried something, my teacher would at least change his facial traits. That was the last time we saw that weirdo, and honestly, it stayed at the back of my mind. It just popped up since I started lurking. So what I have left of it now is just strange feelings every time I notice a green sedan passing by.
I'm in my late 20s and female. We were there for about 2 weeks while my mom underwent treatment for cancer. Unfortunately, soon after arriving, she experienced a lot of pain in her leg, and we later found out that the cancer had spread there and her leg could break off at any wrong step. This meant that if I was going to see anything, I had to go alone. This was fine, as the town we were in was extremely small and filled mostly with the old and sick. There was a larger town only about a mile away, up and over a fairly steep hill, and a large park in between. It was about noon, and my mom wasn't going to need me to be around, so I decided to go for a walk around the park. To get there, I just had to walk down the path across a street lined with inns and cafes on a side leading to the park. There's a lot of twisting paths crisscrossing each other, a lot of benches, a couple of fountains, and 1 or 2 community buildings. I chose a path that would take me right beside an underground fountain about as deep as my shoulders, with steps leading down to the spout. It was there I first saw him. I was headed almost directly toward the fountain when a man's head pops up. Looking directly at me, I looked back at him for a second, thinking I had surprised him just as much. I was the only one who looked away. When I looked back, I realized he was still watching me, and then I noticed he had one arm crossed over his chest and moving, as though he was touching himself. As soon as I realized this, I looked away and changed my direction to give him a wide berth. I was soon stunned in disbelief that I convinced myself that whatever he was doing had nothing to do with me, and that as long as I kept walking, he'd go back to being weird all by himself. I turned down a path that for the immediate area was wide open. I was still close to the cafes and inns, and the occasional other person also taking a midway walk. I was almost to an area that would take the path through patches of woods, which would also take me out of the public eye when I looked back to see if this guy was still in the fountain, but he was gone. Surprised, I quickly did a circle and noticed he had taken off, doing a wide loop that left a lot of opportunity for us to cross paths again. If I didn't change directions once again, I couldn't believe it. I thought it's the middle of the day. We're in a quiet town, about a mile away from a larger one. There's no one here but old and sick people. There's no way a predator would be out here, now hunting me. But still I stopped and decided to change directions again. This time my dumbass decided to take a tiny path that would lead me to the base of the hill that would go over to the larger town and was heavily wooded. I get up there to where the tree started and decide to look again, and that's when I noticed that he had also changed his direction and was practically jogging away from me. I got to where I was a safe distance away and pulled out my phone and started recording myself. I figured I would just look like I was a video chatting with someone. This is when I was shown without a doubt that this guy was after me, because not long after I made it across the park, he comes down the very same path, looking side to side, looking for me, eventually spots me. I had very bright dyed red hair and I was pretty easy to spot in such a wide open area. It's at this distance of the town, should this guy book it back towards me, that I kept wandering around testing to see how far this guy will go. He keeps following me, trying to stay out of sight, because at one point I turn around suddenly and watch him sprint back into some trees until eventually I go up a hill that has zero cover for him to use, and I lose track of him. I continue on to explore a different small town, making sure I'm always in public space and easily seen, but I never saw him again. Trust your gut. My head was telling me that there was no way that this could be happening to me, and I almost tested it by walking into the woods. But my gut screamed, bad idea, and I could not be more relieved I listened. Trust your gut.